Welcome to the We Can Fix Climate Change podcast. In today's episode, we'll cover new EU sustainability reporting rules, universities' conflicting divestment pledges, the potential peak in global fossil fuel demand, the EU's position for COP28, the dominance of solar power in U.S. electricity generation, the impact of spacecraft launches on the ozone layer, and the increase in emissions from new ICE cars.
More than 50,000 companies operating within the European Union will soon be obligated to evaluate the environmental consequences of their activities, as new sustainability reporting regulations come into effect in January 2024. The stipulations will be applicable to all publicly listed companies, as well as sizable non-listed firms and small and medium enterprises listed on the stock exchange. These regulations will necessitate companies to disclose a variety of factors, encompassing pollution levels, water consumption, and the impact on local communities. Furthermore, companies will need to report on the susceptibility of their business to climate change and other sustainability matters, as well as the ecological implications arising from their operations. The primary objective behind these regulations is to encourage companies to adopt a more transparent approach in regard to their environmental footprint, enabling investors and consumers to make well-informed decisions. These rules are also a crucial part of the European Union's broader commitment to limit its greenhouse gas emissions and accomplish its climate targets.
Around 100 UK universities have publicly pledged to divest from the fossil fuel industry. However, it has been revealed that many of these institutions still maintain banking relationships with financial institutions that financially support climate-polluting projects. This perceived contradiction has sparked accusations of hypocrisy from students who are urging these universities to prioritize their climate commitments more diligently. Desmog reported that out of the 95 UK universities that have committed to divest from oil and gas, they collectively have banking connections with financial institutions that have contributed a total of $419 billion, £345 billion, to polluting ventures between 2016 and 2022. Notably, the UK's largest bank by assets, Barclays, is among these financial institutions. Barclays has provided funding to some of the most controversial fossil fuel projects globally, including the Dakota Access Pipeline and the East African Crude Oil Pipeline. The list of banks involved also includes HSBC, Lloyds Banking Group, and NatWest Group, all of which have financed significant fossil fuel ventures such as coal mines, oil sands operations, and fracking wells. Students at various UK universities have raised concerns about the hypocrisy and greenwashing exhibited by their institutions. Their argument emphasizes that universities cannot be truly dedicated to climate action while maintaining financial ties with institutions that directly support the fossil fuel industry. In response to these allegations, some universities have stated that they are actively working to transition their banking relationships to more sustainable financial institutions. However, others have declared that they have no intentions of altering their current banking arrangements.
According to a recent study published in the journal Nature Climate Change, global demand for fossil fuels may peak within the next 5 to 10 years. The study, conducted by researchers from Stanford University and the University of California, Berkeley, analyzed data on global fossil fuel consumption over the past 150 years. The findings of the study indicate that while fossil fuel consumption has been growing exponentially, this growth is now beginning to slow down. Interestingly, the researchers also discovered a strong correlation between economic growth and fossil fuel consumption. However, in recent years, economic growth has continued to rise, while fossil fuel consumption has shown signs of deceleration. This suggests that there has been a shift towards more efficient use of fossil fuels, which holds significant implications for the future. It indicates that the world is gradually moving away from its heavy dependence on fossil fuels, a positive development in terms of mitigating the harmful effects on the climate. While the exact timeline remains uncertain, the study's findings imply that peak fossil fuel consumption is approaching much sooner than previously anticipated. This insight brings both opportunities and challenges, as it emphasizes the urgent need to accelerate the transition to cleaner and more sustainable energy sources. Overall, the study's conclusions shed light on the evolving dynamics of global fossil fuel consumption and its relationship with economic growth. As the world continues its efforts to combat climate change, the research serves as a reminder that progress is being made, albeit steadily, towards a more sustainable future.
The European Union has solidified its collective stance for the forthcoming United Nations COP28 climate change conference in Dubai. In a recent agreement, EU environment ministers reached a consensus on a shared position, albeit after making compromises to accommodate the diverse needs of its 27 member states. The EU will advocate for a threefold increase in global renewable energy output by 2030, coupled with a doubling of energy efficiency enhancements. Furthermore, the bloc aims to achieve a predominantly fossil fuel-free global energy sector well in advance of 2050. Although the EU refrained from announcing new emissions targets, it intends to update its commitment to reflect recently enacted climate legislation, which could potentially exceed its existing goal of a 55% reduction in emissions by 2030. Nevertheless, certain terms calling for the phasing out of fossil fuels were diluted to secure unanimous approval. References to unabated fossil fuels, which pertain to those without carbon capture technology, were scaled back in the final version. Additionally, instead of specifying a particular coal phase-out date, the EU opted for a statement that the power sector should be predominantly decarbonized by the 2030s. Member states heavily dependent on coal voiced opposition to the more stringent proposals. Consequently, the final agreement represents a compromise, where the EU speaks with a unified voice while toning down demands regarding the phase-out of fossil fuels. Climate activists and certain EU legislators criticize these concessions as a setback for the new climate chief and a lifeline for polluters. However, EU officials hailed the decision as progress, recognizing that more ambitious measures will be necessary going forward. With the EU's joint position now established, the bloc ventures into COP28, aiming to sustain pressure on other nations to address the climate emergency, while simultaneously addressing internal divisions that hinder its own transition away from fossil fuels.
According to data from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the U.S. solar industry is experiencing significant growth in 2023. This year, solar power additions have surpassed those of natural gas for the first time. Through August 2023, utility-scale solar and wind combined have contributed to more than 50% of new electricity generation capacity in the U.S. Specifically, solar power alone accounted for 40%, which translates to nearly 9,000 megawatts. This figure represents a notable 35% increase compared to the same period last year. Moreover, other renewable energy sources such as wind, hydro, and geothermal have also seen positive strides. Collectively, all renewable sources now account for more than 50% of the new capacity being added. This indicates a significant shift towards cleaner energy alternatives. Looking ahead, the future appears promising for the solar industry. Forecasts suggest that solar power additions over the next 3 years could nearly quadruple the additions of wind energy and be 20 times higher than those of natural gas. If these projections materialize, renewables could potentially supply more than a third of the total U.S. capacity in just a few years. The data reflects a positive transformation in the U.S. energy landscape, with solar power leading the charge towards a more sustainable and greener future.
The space age has brought about significant changes in the stratosphere, specifically in relation to the ozone layer. With the growing number of spacecraft launches and returns, the accumulation of metals has become a matter of concern for scientists. The potential impact of these metals on the atmosphere, ozone layer, and life on Earth is yet to be fully understood. While the suspicion that spacecraft and satellites were altering the upper atmosphere has long existed, studying the stratosphere has proven to be a challenging task. However, recent research has shed light on the presence of substantial amounts of metals from spacecraft and satellites in aerosols within the stratosphere. The findings reveal that metals like lithium, aluminum, copper, and lead originating from spacecraft re-entry surpass the quantities of these metals found in natural cosmic dust. Astonishingly, around 10% of large sulfuric acid particles, known for safeguarding and buffering the ozone layer, contain aluminum and other metals from spacecraft. By 2030, it is estimated that approximately 50,000 more satellites could be launched into orbit. Consequently, this may result in up to half of stratospheric sulfuric acid particles containing metals from re-entry within the next few decades. While the exact consequences of these metals on the atmosphere, ozone layer, and life on Earth remain uncertain, scientists express their concerns about potential alterations in atmospheric chemistry, damage to the ozone layer, and potential adverse effects on human health. As the space age progresses, further research is needed to fully comprehend and mitigate these potential risks.
A recent study conducted by climate action group Possible has revealed concerning findings regarding new internal combustion engine, ICE, cars. The study indicates that the average new ICE car in 2023 emits more pollutants than the average new car sold a decade ago. This increase in emissions can be attributed to several factors. Firstly, there has been a significant shift in consumer preference towards SUVs. These vehicles, being heavier and consuming more fuel, release larger amounts of carbon dioxide, CO2, compared to smaller cars. Additionally, the study highlights the role of affluent consumers in contributing to emissions. It suggests that the wealthiest fifth of consumers tend to purchase vehicles that are higher polluters, likely due to the societal perception of SUVs as status symbols. To address this issue, there are various measures that can be taken to decrease emissions from new ICE cars. One approach involves enhancing the overall efficiency of these vehicles. This can be achieved through the utilization of lighter materials and the development of more efficient engines. Another strategy is to incentivize consumers to choose smaller and more fuel-efficient vehicles. This could be accomplished through the implementation of tax breaks or other advantageous measures. By taking these actions, we can begin to mitigate the environmental impact of new ICE cars, ensuring a more sustainable future for our planet.
In today's episode, we covered the new EU sustainability reporting rules, the discrepancy between UK universities' divestment pledges and their actual bank choices, the predicted peak in global fossil fuel demand, the EU's position for COP28, the growth of solar power in the US electricity generation capacity, the potential impact of spacecraft launches on the ozone layer, and the environmental implications of new ICE cars. Thank you for tuning in to the We Can Fix Climate Change podcast. As always, don't forget to subscribe, share this podcast with your friends, and visit all our social media channels. And consider checking out our newsletter with more stories and links at wecanfixclimatechange.substack.com. Links are, as always, in the description box. See you next week.